Welcome to Inside the Mavs here on Kevin Gray Sports. My name is Kevin Gray, Mavs Insider for 105.3 The Fan. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Kevin Gray Sports. You can also download my podcast, the Gray Area Podcast, wherever you get your podcast for free. I know I've been gone and haven't done my solo videos for quite some time, but don't worry, I've been keeping tabs on the Dallas Mavericks and have been keeping up with them throughout the course of the season. That's because I do have my hosting duties every single day, Monday through Friday, 7 to 11 on the Get Right with my partner Reginald Atatula on 105.3 The Fan. But I'm back. It's going to be a busy offseason for the Dallas Mavericks, whether or not they are able to re-sign Kyrie Irving, if they're able to keep the number 10 overall pick or better, if they're able to keep their draft pick that may be owed to the New York Knicks if it doesn't fall in the top 10. A lot of different things to get to throughout the course of this offseason. And Tim Cato of The Athletic didn't waste any time giving us a primer on what this all could look like this offseason. If you missed my interview with him, you can go back here on Kevin Gray Sports on YouTube, watch the entire interview that I had with him last week detailing all kinds of Mavericks topics, some of which he detailed in his piece in The Athletic today. Obviously, a disappointing season for the Dallas Mavericks, missing not just the playoffs, but the play-in entirely, trying to keep its pick in the lottery, hoping that it's top 10 or better, because if it's not, it's going to be owed to Jalen Brunson and the New York Knicks, who, of course, are in their Eastern Conference semifinal matchup against the Miami Heat. Meanwhile, questions on whether or not a guy like Christian Wood will be back with this team, the kind of assets that teams may be wanting in terms of Tim Hardaway Jr., Jaden Hardy, or Josh Green, among other things. But needless to say, the Mavericks had a terrible season full of misery and disappointment. Luka Doncic, whom apparently, according to Tim Cato in his latest piece today, said that the Mavericks had a plan going in to have a load management situation for him, given all the basketball that he has played over the last couple of years, with his deep run to the Western Conference Finals last year, his obligations to Team Slovenia. But as the season went on, obviously, you couldn't do it. The Mavericks, who had inexplicable losses and blowing a 22-point lead to the Phoenix Suns, bad losses to the New Orleans Pelicans, a horrible loss to the Oklahoma City Thunder when they blew a 16-point lead in the fourth quarter, losing to a Denver Nuggets team at one point that were missing 3 of its starters, including Nikola Jokic. Teams looked around and said, we can make Luka do everything and have him score 50 a night to try and beat us because the rest of the roster isn't all that great. And this was before they traded for Kyrie Irving. You remember the games that he had against the San Antonio Spurs and the Houston Rockets, where he had to throw up 50 points in games just to help them beat the lowly Spurs and Rockets. This was a season marred by not just the inconsistency of individuals, injuries that beset Josh Green and Maxi Kleber, but the most polarizing figure on this team in one Christian Wood, which I'll get to here in just a moment. But Cato details his piece about how the Lakers are not going to be interested in the services of Kyrie Irving, despite the fact that he's showing up at Lakers playoff games, dapping it up with his boy LeBron James. There are only a few teams that are going to be going to have the kind of cap space this offseason to even offer Kyrie the max contract that he is looking for, potentially. Now, of course, the Mavericks can give him a 5-year, $272 million contract because they do have his bird rights and they can pay him more than anybody. The relationship that they're banking on that Kyrie has with Nico Harrison, his idol Jason Kidd, and among others on that team are some of the things that they are hoping that they can utilize to ensure Kyrie stays around. And despite the team going 5-11 with Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic on this team, they believe that going into their future, that those two paired together, even with Kyrie Irving turning 32 next year, you could sign him up at least for the next 3 to 4 years to ensure that the offense, at least for this team, continues to get better. Because we all know how poor the construction of the roster is right now. A team devoid of 3-and-D wings, size and length at the center position with the failed signing of JaVale McGee, whom Tim Cato confirmed in his piece today was at the behest of your boy Jason Kidd, who wanted JaVale McGee, and the Mavericks were like, cool, We'll give JaVale McGee a 3-year deal, a multi-year deal to stick around. Meanwhile, Bruce Brown out here putting in work for the Denver Nuggets and doing so in a fantastic way. Needless to say, the Mavericks have got a lot of work to do. I'll go back to Christian Wood on that work front. The Mavericks apparently never wanted him. As I detailed in my conversation with Tim Cato last week, apparently, according to Cato, the Mavericks were trying to get off of Christian Wood on draft night, the same night that they traded for him. Questions about work ethic, questions about tardiness, and things that we have heard from other reports continue to surface, and the lack of on and off court inconsistency at times for him, even though he shot career highs from the free throw line at over 77%, shot nearly 52% from the field, shot about 36-37% from three, and was a pretty good scorer off the bench. But as Callie Kaplan detailed in her report a couple of weeks ago, one of the things that the Mavericks loved during his time that he had gotten hurt was the fact that they didn't have to call defensive assignments for him on every single possession. The lack of consistency on the defense, actually the poor defense that he played with all season long, did not lend himself to much confidence from the Mavericks team, and apparently none at all from the time that he got here. As Cato lines out, not unexpectedly, the Mavericks are not going to be bringing him back. So, Christian Wood, whom a lot of people wanted to see play more because of the fact that Dwight Powell was a revolving door on the defensive end as he normally is, even though he does provide a lot of effort coming off the bench and at times had to start. The roster for the Mavericks has to be much better going into next year. Whether you find 3-and-D wings, whether you find the ability to find some length and size in the middle, DeAndre Ayton, or Chris Middleton, as Tim Cato points out in his piece, all I know is, based on what I saw and observed this past season, the Mavericks are poorly constructed roster-wise. They have a defensive problem, and at times have not figured out between Luka and Kyrie, which you saw at times was okay, how to play off of each other. There were plenty of examples where you saw them being able to learn how to give and take with one another to allow the other to cook on a particular night. Obviously, that comes with more chemistry and time between the two of them on the floor. But as one team executive talked about in Cato's piece, and I'll read it for you here, quote, as one team executive joked early in the season, it would be in opponent's best interest if the entire league committed to wearing Doncic down, forcing him to score 50 points in the hopes that he would be exhausted by Christmas. Now, many teams really kind of did that. As I mentioned, the lowly Spurs saw Luka Doncic drop 51 points on him. And, of course, the 50 points that he scored against the Houston Rockets in another win. His ability to have to get into shape throughout the course of this summer, remain in shape, but most importantly, commit to the defensive end is something that is desperately needed for this Mavericks team. This is all besides the point that they may not even have the top 10 pick that they may owe to the New York Knicks. Now, there's about an 80% chance that they will keep this pick on May the 16th, which, if you're the Mavericks, great, cool. What do we do with it? And that is the biggest question on the minds of Mavericks fans, which is, do you keep the pick and find yourself with a talented prospect, or do you move off of it and package it? That's where we get to some of the roster construction. The league, according to the piece, feels that Tim Hardaway Jr., who's on a descending contract, Jaden Hardy, who may be the guy that replaces Tim Hardaway Jr. if they are able to move off of him, because apparently the Mavericks been trying to move off old boy for the past 2 seasons. And then, of course, there's Josh Green, whom we've seen at times develop a nice jump shot from the three-point line, but still remain inconsistent from his distance shooting. Again, Nico Harrison and this front office have their work cut out for them. So much has gone into the publicized nature of how Jalen Brunson departed. Whom you believe or not is up to you at this point, because Mark Cuban blames Jalen Brunson's daddy for getting involved too much in his son's business. The Brunson camp is like, hey, we never got the chance to be able to refuse an offer. We were never offered one. And, of course, he signed a 4-year, $104 million deal to play with the New York Knicks. And, again, as I mentioned, playing right now in the East semis against Jimmy Butler and the Miami Heat. A season, as I would like to define it, full of dysfunction. The Mavericks couldn't play defense. They moved off of the one defensive asset that they had in Dorian Finney-Smith and to a smaller degree Spencer Dinwiddie to go acquire Kyrie Irving once the Mavericks saw an opportunity after all the trouble that he kept getting himself into in Brooklyn with all the things that happened with the posting of the anti-Semitic things on his Instagram. So a season that was full of disappointment, dysfunction, confusion, a lack of defense, and now a roster that needs a complete rehauling. How do the Mavericks get there? What is the path for the Mavericks to get there? Christian Wood not expected to be back. Dwight Powell has an inspiring contract as well. Who knows if he's going to be back with this team? Concerns, though, rely now on Maxi Kleber, who we saw had a torn hamstring at 31 years of age. Are we seeing age-related decline just like we saw with JaVale McGee, who couldn't get on the floor with all the DNP CDs that I couldn't count, despite the fact that Jason Kidd wanted him? This team has a lot to fix, and to fix it, they need to do it rather quickly. You heard from Tim McMahon and also confirmed by Cato himself that there is obvious fear that if the roster doesn't improve within the next couple of years, that Luka Doncic could ask out. Now, Doncic, of course, tried to put those things to bed during the end of the season press conference where he said, look, I'm happy here. I'm not going anywhere. For now, sure. What does that look like within the next couple of years if this team doesn't improve? Because let me tell you something. This is about the amount of step back that the Mavericks need to take, because there can't be any more steps back in the Luka Doncic era, because that's not what this precocious 24-year-old signed up for. Hyper-competitive, can be radioactive with referees at times, but at the same time, one of the 5 best players in this league. And that's a fact, 3 years running. If it happens a 4th year, we'll see. The Mavericks, though, full of misery all season long, offer a glimmer of hope if they're able to keep their top 10 protected pick, maybe flip it into something worthwhile that can allow them, according to people you talk to around the league, a lot of volatility this summer with teams that were disappointing. Toronto, that may want to give up assets and go into rebuilding mode. The trade market could be extremely active because from a salary cap perspective, once you sign Kyrie Irving, there's not a lot of money left to do much of anything. So your best bet may be to find something in the trade market. That's where Tim Hardaway Jr. and others come in, because you've got to find a way to not only maybe move off of Tim Hardaway Jr., Davis Bertans' toxic contract, among others. Reggie Bullock's partially guaranteed contract happens this summer as well for the Mavericks if they choose to go down that road. All I know is that the Mavericks need to do something, and to do it quickly, and figure out the best way to move forward, because if they don't, oh boy, it's going to be much more difficult conversations around here than what we've already started to have around this team. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Kevin Gray Sports. This has been Inside the Mavs right here on Kevin Gray Sports again. Mavs Insider for 105 through the fan. I appreciate you bearing with me, hanging in there, and being able to be alongside with me on this journey here. I'll promise I'll have many more videos coming along during the course of this summer. But for now, I'll talk to you later. Peace.